is a joint initiative between Gibson Sheet Lawyers and the Hutt Valley Chamber of Commerce, designed to provide a platform for local businesses to come together and support each other. We're excited to kick off this year's series and look forward to seeing the positive impact it will have on our community. I'm honoured to introduce our guest speaker for today, the Leader of the Opposition, Christopher Luxon. As many of you know, Mr Luxon has had a diverse and successful career before entering politics. He began his career with Unilever in New Zealand, then moved on to work in Australia, the UK, North America, and ultimately became the CEO of Unilever Canada. Following his tenure at Unilever, he joined Air New Zealand as CEO from 2011 until 2019. Under his leadership, the National Party has seen a resurgence in support, and recent polling suggests a much closer 2023 election outcome than prior years. With Mr Luxon's strong focus on education, economic development and sustainability, it is clear that he is committed to delivering positive outcomes for both the New Zealand people and businesses alike. Mr Luxon will be discussing some of National's plans to take New Zealand forward. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Christopher Luxon to this Chamber event.
Well, kia ora koutou, and thank you all for coming. And before I begin, can I just acknowledge a few people in the room? We've got Chris Bishop here, who's the boy who represents everything that's absolutely fantastic about the Hutt. We've got Erica Stanford, who is our passionate education spokesperson. I can tell you is determined to make sure we teach our kids the basics brilliantly. We've also got Emma Chatterton with us, who's been a great support as we've been thinking about our wider education policy. So thank you, Emma, for all your help and support as well. Got the incredible John Fiso here, whose achievements are just fantastic, and John, it's great to see you as well. Can I also acknowledge Mayor Wayne Guppy from Upper Hutt, who's just a fantastic mayor and done a brilliant job over a long period of time. Mark Scully, Patrick McKibben, and all of the team from the Hutt Valley Chamber of Commerce. I've been to your place many times before, and you just have such excellent events and great engagement, and we appreciate it. And finally, Nicola, can I just say to Gibson Sheet, thank you for sponsoring and hosting the event that's here today. It is a real pleasure to be back here again at the Hutt Valley Chamber of Commerce, and I can tell you that because having just spent 7 days in isolation with COVID, which the whole country becomes aware of very quickly, I can't stress how much as an extrovert it is so lovely to actually be out talking to real people in the flesh. I really enjoy it. But can I just say again, thank you for accommodating me and changing your diaries to work around us. We really appreciate it. Now, I've come to politics because I think I have to tell you, New Zealand is simply the best country on planet Earth, and I think together we have endless potential. And I actually believe more than ever that if we make the right decisions, New Zealand has a fantastic future ahead of it. I think we can do better, we can be more prosperous, and we can be so much more ambitious. And I have to tell you, I don't want to settle for drift and mediocrity, and I know and I believe that other New Zealanders don't want it either. But as I meet New Zealanders up and down the country, they're telling me that they're frustrated and that they're worried. And conditions offshore, including the war in Ukraine, climate change fears, and upheaval in the banking world, are creating a backdrop of anxiety. And added to that, here at home, the worsening economy and the bloated government that can't deliver are bad enough. But it's this cost of living crisis that is now deeply biting so many households across our country. And Labor has no economic strategy except to spend more money. And it's now spending $1 billion more each and every week. And that's an increase of $23,000 per household per year. And Grant Robertson is also collecting $43 billion more in tax each year. And that's $17,000 more tax per household coming into the government's coffers. And it's partly because Labor refuses to inflation adjust tax thresholds so more people can keep more of what they earn. And I have to tell you, it's a very, very special skill to be able to spend more money, to hire 14,000 more bureaucrats, and yet incredibly deliver worse outcomes. And I can tell you, you wouldn't do it with your businesses, but Labor is managing to do it, and they've been managing to do it now for 6 years. So I want to be crystal clear. New Zealand needs a very serious turnaround because we are totally, utterly going in the wrong direction currently. We are not solving our most serious problems, and we are not realising all that endless potential that we have. And I have to say, I don't accept the status quo. I don't accept that the highest inflation in 32 years and rapidly rising interest rates is the best that we can do. I don't accept that 54% of our kids regularly not attending school is okay. I don't accept that the worst waiting times in hospital emergency departments are acceptable while the government builds a big new mega health bureaucracy. And I don't accept that violent crime being up 33%, gang membership up 56%, and a ram raid every 10 hours is the new normal that we have to accept in New Zealand on law and order. And I certainly don't increase a fourfold increase in kids living in cars being acceptable either. So I want you to know a national government I lead will know what it's doing, where it's going, what matters, and what must be done to help New Zealanders now get ahead. We're going to chart a positive course for New Zealand that's not about left or right, but it's about going forwards instead of backwards. And it's about delivering results and outcomes so that all New Zealanders can improve their daily lives and actually get ahead. So in government, National's going to have 5 priorities. 1, National will curb the rising cost of living. We have a 5-point plan to fight the drivers of inflation, and we're going to support Kiwis doing it tough. And as a good example, our recently announced Family Boost policy means that families that earn up to $180,000 will be eligible for a $75 a week or $3,900 a year rebate on their childcare costs. And importantly, we'll pay for it by slashing Labor's wasteful spending on consultants. So the consultants in the room, I apologise, but just be prepared, your income's going down. The second thing that we're going to do is we're going to lift incomes for all, because the first rung of lifting incomes, especially for those doing it tough, is to move people off welfare and into work. All of our businesses are crying out for workers, and yet under Labor there are 50,000 more people now on a job seeker benefit than there were when National left office. And so our Welfare That Works policy that we announced last year will help young people find a job. But if you don't play ball, you're going to face sanctions on your benefit, because under National, personal responsibility will be back. And we're also going to lift incomes by enabling our businesses to be able to flourish, because the more successful New Zealand's businesses are, the better the salaries and the wages and the incomes and the opportunities that they can offer. 3, National's going to deliver resilient infrastructure for the future. Incredibly, Labor has not delivered a single major transport project from start to finish in almost 6 years in government. 4, National will restore law and order. We're going to give our police more powers to stop gangs gathering in public, make it harder for them to access guns, and also make it ban gang patches in public places. And we're going to introduce youth military academies in partnership with community organisations for serious repeat youth offenders. And 5, National's going to provide better health and, importantly, education services. New Zealand can be world leading, and there is no subject on which I'm more passionate or that motivates me more than education. And that's what I want to spend the time talking to you about today. Just this week I was in a primary school and I saw 5-year-olds completely absorbed in forming letters, sounding out words, and their sense of concentration, their sense of engagement and their satisfaction was really palpable. And I saw in them some of myself at the same age. The dawning of possibility, the striving to do well, and that excitement of all that could be learned and mastered. And at high school, I developed a lifelong love of history, and I was also encouraged by a great economics teacher to go pursue commerce at the University of Canterbury. But before any of that was possible, I, like probably all of you here, had a very good grounding in the basics at primary school. And it's not a stretch, I think, to say that the life that I've had and that my family has had can be traced back to support and encouragement that I received from my parents and also from my granddad, and from being taught the basics incredibly well by some outstanding teachers in the New Zealand state school system. And I am forever grateful for that start, and I am determined that every New Zealand child should have the chance to improve their circumstances through education, whatever their starting point is. So I want you to know a national government that I lead will aim to get every child to get a brilliant education in the state school system, so that when they leave school, they have that opportunity to live the life that they want. But our starting point, if we're honest, is 3 decades of declining student achievement across all parts of society. There's no doubt that there are high-achieving students, high-achieving teachers and schools throughout New Zealand. But could the Minister of Education look every parent in the eye and guarantee that their child will receive a world-leading education wherever they live? She could not. And I think as parents or potential employers in this room, you likely will have a sense of the malaise in the education system and maybe are a bit shocked by just how bad it has actually become. A recent pilot of an NCA reading, writing and maths assessment revealed that two-thirds of secondary school students failed to reach the minimum level that the OECD says is absolutely necessary to succeed in further learning, life and work. And worse, the school system's ineffectiveness is most pronounced in low-income areas, with just 2% of our Decile 1 high school students able to pass a basic writing test, and just 10% able to pass maths. But all school levels are going backwards, with too many kids failing or not achieving their potential or not being extended. And yet back in the year 2000, New Zealand was in the top 10 countries for maths, reading and science, according to the OECD's PISA rankings. And now we're outside the top 10 in all three disciplines. And in maths, we've actually dropped from being 4th in the world to 27th. And I think many parents got a sense of what's happening when during COVID they saw their kids' lessons. Remote learning exposed the school system and the lack of the focus on the basics. And the results in education today are more than disappointing. They are more than frustrating. They are utterly unacceptable, and the government I lead will make it a priority to turn them around. 15-year-olds in New Zealand today perform worse in science and reading tests than 15-year-olds did in New Zealand 20 years ago. And in fact, the average 15-year-old today is 9 months behind where the average 15-year-old was 2 decades ago for science and reading. And in maths, they're actually 1.5 years behind. So now let's add another layer, school attendance, because almost 100,000 kids are now chronically absent from school. And that means they're regularly missing out 3 days out of every 10. And think about that. That's 30% of your education, almost 4 years of your 13 years at school. And I think the Minister of Education should be kept awake at night by these statistics, because the problem is not just the kids are failing, but the system is failing. And I think all of us who are parents naturally hope that our children will have much more opportunities than we did. But how can that hope be realistic? When kids are starting school today, are entering an education system that is worse and delivering worse results than when their parents went to school. The Ministry of Education's recent suggestion to combat that failure was to make the tests easier by using simpler words, having fewer questions and actually allowing spell checks. I've got to tell you, that is not a national solution, because there is a serious systemic failure in schooling and we are going to reverse it. So if New Zealand is to have internationally competitive incomes and world-class living standards, we need a world-class education system. And that starts with teaching the basics brilliantly. And we don't have that now. New Zealand has been running a failed experiment in which the importance of knowledge and skills have been diminished and they've been replaced by concepts like competencies. And instinctively and through evidence, we know that it's by improving children's literacy and numeracy in line with expectations each and every school year, that's going to allow them to progress well through primary school and arrive at secondary school ready for extension. However, only 45% of our kids finishing intermediate school are at the level they should be in maths, and only 35% are at the curriculum level in writing. And the evidence shows that if you're failing in year 8, that last year of intermediate school, you're going to struggle through high school and perhaps you'll just simply give up and stop going. And I have to say, I want an end to children giving up on school because it gives them no sense of belonging, no sense of purpose or no sense of satisfaction. And I want an end to good teachers quitting out of exhaustion and frustration because the system isn't helping them or their pupils get ahead. So National will be unveiling policies over the coming months that lay out our plans for getting kids back in school and back on track and supporting our excellent teachers to excel. And I've said it many times, I am ambitious for New Zealand, and that's why today I am announcing that we will be aiming high in education. We will not accept mediocrity in the school system. The social cost and the economic cost for New Zealand are simply too high of failure. So I'm pleased to tell you that a national government is going to target 80% of Year 8 students being at or above the expected curriculum level in their age in reading, writing and maths and science by 2030. And further, we're going to aim to return New Zealand students into the top 10 countries in the world in maths, reading and science, measured by the international PISA rankings by 2033. And here's how we're going to do it. Our children, our teachers and our schools, I have to say, are not personally responsible for New Zealand's achievement decline. It's been a lack of courageous political leadership, a failure to value what we once had, and insufficient direction from the national curriculum have all played a role. And so too has a willingness to be led by ideas and ideology rather than evidence and science, and a complete lack of system accountability. But the good news is that these things can be turned around by a government that focuses on what matters and that believes that knowledge should be at the very, very core of education, and that is willing to fix a system that is broken. And that's why I'm pleased to be announcing our Teaching the Basics Brilliantly plan, which is the first part of National's education policy. And our plan to help children complete their schooling with the education that they need to pursue the life they want has 4 parts to it. The first is that we're going to require all primary and intermediate schools to provide at least an hour of reading, an hour of writing, and an hour of maths on average every day. Because our children need the time to acquire knowledge, to practice skills, to master the basics, so it stays with them for life. The Royal Society, which reviewed how New Zealand actually teaches maths, concluded it should be mandatory to spend 1 hour learning maths each and every day. And the Education Review Office said back in 2018 that declining rates of achievement in reading must be reversed so that children are prepared for the demands of the secondary school curriculum. And I've said many times that a national government will not continue just to do things that don't work. Delivering improved outcomes, in my mind, is all that matters. That's how New Zealanders get ahead. So change is required, and under National, it begins with teaching the basics brilliantly. So to be clear, when I talk about an hour a day of reading, writing and maths, I'm not talking about an hour a day of children sitting still, doing endless spelling tests or repetitive maths exercises. Some of you have some terrible memories of that from your own schooling. But our teachers, I have to tell you, and I've met many of them, they are deeply committed, they are deeply innovative, they are highly creative professionals, and they know how to bring their classes alive and how to teach in a way that works best and engages our children. But I have to say, they're not always given the tools, I believe, to succeed. And a recent study by the Royal Society said nearly half of all Year 4 teachers reported feeling only moderately confident in actually teaching maths. And as a result, disturbingly, some teachers are saying they're deliberately scheduling less class time to teach maths as a result. And so for those teachers who are not currently spending an hour each on maths, reading and writing, that will be a requirement under National. Now, the second part of our policy is to rewrite the curriculum to clearly state what must be taught each year in reading, writing, maths and science to every year group. Because New Zealand's current curriculum is just far too loose. And it doesn't give teachers clear guidance about what to teach when. And instead of being divided by years, it is actually grouped into bands spanning 2 to 3 school years. And let me tell you what that sort of means in practice. It means that kids in England and Australia start learning, addition and subtraction at year 1, whereas New Zealand children can start learning addition and subtraction any time between year 2 and 5. And here's another example. Whereas New Zealand children can start learning algebra any time in the years between years 6 to 10, if you're in England, the kids start at year 6, and if you're in Australia, the kids start at year 5. And so the curriculum's woolliness just means that teachers are then having to spend their weekends and late evenings trying to figure out what they're supposed to be teaching. And they shouldn't have to do that. It should be clear. And so National will get rid of the 3-year bands, replacing them with very explicit expectations of achievement and knowledge dissemination for each and every year group. And we're going to check kids have learned what the curriculum says they should have learned, and we'll keep parents informed about where their kids are up to. Research commissioned by the Ministry of Education in 2021 found that teachers' expectations of pupils can also be too low. And the research said that there is evidence that kids are capable of more than most teachers expect of them. And further, it found that teachers tend to even expect less of Māori and Pacific pupils. And that's why the curriculum rewrite will be clear about what is taught each year, because New Zealand needs to be much more ambitious for all of our kids. So let's lift our sights, because it's not okay that children are held back or are not extended because their abilities are underestimated. And it's not okay that Kiwi kids start learning basic skills later than their international peers. Now, we know children learn at different speeds, and that means we need to monitor their progress carefully and measure their achievement so that we know exactly when they need more support or more extension. Now, Labor has undertaken a so-called curriculum refresh, and it doesn't go far enough or deep enough to address the existing problems, and National will do what needs to be done to fix the system. Now, currently, we have no assurance that schools objectively know the learning progress of each and every child. And it's quite astonishing that in our school system, the first national test for numeracy and literacy is not until NCA. And until then, we are flying almost completely blind. So the third part of our policy is that we'll require standardised, robust assessment at least twice a year in reading, writing and maths from year 3 to year 8, primary and intermediate age, to check on each and every child's progress. And detailed results will then be reported to parents. And this will provide something that we don't have at the moment, which is a reliable national picture of how New Zealand children are progressing at primary and intermediate school against the curriculum. And it will also provide data to principals, teachers and parents about how their kids are doing. And I think it's by reporting the results of assessment clearly and transparently to parents that parents will then have a better chance of being involved in their child's learning. And the stronger the relationship between parents and schools, the more likely children will do well. And finally, we're going to ensure that teachers and teacher trainees spend more time learning how to teach the basics. And we're going to provide them with more classroom tools to help them teach reading, maths and writing brilliantly. And recently, distinguished Professor Gavin Martin, he chaired the Royal Society panel on maths teaching, said that New Zealand had amongst the poorest prepared teachers in the world. And I quote him, he said, "Principals know the system is broken, teachers know the system is broken, the ministry knows the system is broken, but we are in a sort of stasis because it's an incredibly difficult situation to address." And we're talking about a systemic teacher training failure that's not only in maths, and children and teachers should not be paying the price for a failure of a system that they actually had no hand in devising. And so National says it's just too important not to fix this. National will therefore refocus initial teacher training so that all new teachers are themselves confident in the subjects that they are teaching. And that will be a requirement for their teacher registration. For existing teachers, National is going to change professional development priorities to focus on teaching these basics. And National believes that every student deserves a teacher who is confident in teaching the basics brilliantly. And in other countries, like Finland, for example, teachers can actually access a wide variety of resources to create lessons, but that doesn't exist for New Zealand's teachers today. And so National is going to deliver a central resource bank of high-quality teaching resources that supports the curriculum that we've defined, because that's really important, that they don't spend their weekends and their evenings wasting time trying to dream up their plans. New Zealand needs more teachers. New Zealand needs great teachers, and National doesn't believe that teachers should have to pay to teach. And that's why we're going to scrap teachers paying for the registration fees to teach. We don't think that's appropriate they do that at all. So before I finish, I do want to talk directly to teachers and to parents. And firstly, can I say to teachers, soon after I became the leader of the National Party, in the first few days, I visited primary and secondary schools in Christchurch, where principals and teachers told me how it is for them in schools today. And I've gone on to visit a lot more schools since then. And I can tell you that we have great teachers that are incredibly passionate and incredibly driven to teach their kids well. But in addition to teaching, you have become the frontline response to our complex social, educational, housing and wellbeing challenges. Your counsellors dealing with unprecedented anxiety amongst our students. Your social workers dealing with vulnerable families. You're upholding court orders about which kid goes to which parent when. You're coping with an influx of learners with additional learning and behavioural needs. And I want you to do what you do best, which is to teach in engaging ways so that our children learn. National doesn't want you spending your weekends reinventing the curriculum and devising teaching materials. So National's not asking you to do more. National wants to support you because what children learn in your class this year and then next year and what they learn right throughout school will play a very big role in determining their life outcomes. It's that important. And to parents, can I say that I am ambitious for your children? I want them to have the very best start at primary school. And with a good grounding in the basics, they can go on to secondary school with confidence, and when they leave school, they have all sorts of opportunities ahead of them. So National will change teaching so that your child and every child learns the basics incredibly well and has the opportunity to be extended, and if they are ahead, or caught up if they are behind. National will make sure you find out more about what your kids are learning at every year level and how they are progressing so you can stay engaged. So ladies and gentlemen, school achievement, I have to say, has declined under successive governments. But I'm telling you that a national government I lead is going to stop the decline. Because under National, the malaise of mediocrity and the culture of excuses is going to end. And more than that, we'll aim to make the education system world class. And I can tell you it was once and it can be again. And we're going to have a government that wants it to happen. We have the teachers who can make it happen, and we have the children who need it to happen. And so National's plan will benefit the whole country. But the real winners are going to be the kids who one day have the chance to realise all of their potential and lead the lives that they want, because regardless of where they came from or where they lived, their teachers taught them the basics brilliantly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Look, from a purely business perspective, I think we would all welcome education delivering better results for our young people. Consistent complaint we hear from our business community is that our school leaders are underprepared for the world of work, and anything we can do to improve that, I fully and wholeheartedly support. Furthermore, I think the words you mentioned, moving away from ideology and towards fact and science, is something that every business person here would be fully supportive of. Look, we're going to do some Q&A right now. I'm sure the room has plenty of questions for Christopher, so now's your chance. He's in the front of the room, he's in the headlights. Fire away.
I'm coming out of COVID ready to go, so yeah, let's go. Yes, ma'am.
How are you going to, you suggested getting children back into school, which obviously is getting less and less. How are you going to achieve that?
Yeah, well, look, when Erica and I go around talking to principals and school teachers, one of the major reasons for why kids are disengaging from school is, and you can understand it, if you show up in year 9 and 10 and you don't have a basic grounding in the basics really well, you don't feel very good about yourself and you think school's a huge waste of time. So really, a lot of what we're talking about here, about setting our kids up so that by the time they hit year 4, year 8, we know that they're making great progress on the basics of maths, reading and writing. So when they arrive at school, at high school, they're ready to go. The sad thing is the school principals and the data suggests that almost, roughly about 50% of our kids showing up in year 9, the old third form, are actually not at curriculum when they start high school. And of course, if you're not at curriculum, how do you think you feel about school if you actually can't master the subjects, you don't read like a 13-year-old should, or do maths like a 13-year-old should? So, that's why we've got to be really single-minded and ruthless about it. We are going to teach these basics incredibly well because they are the predeterminant that determines success for our kids and doing well in school. So that's one key component around how we get our kids back into school. Yes, sir.
So,
mate, I like the haircut. You're a good-looking dude. I've got to say it.
So, a key part of what you're talking about is both obviously then resourcing the school to do in a common way, but also you said about this resource centre, right, that they could call them. How are you going to create that in a fast enough time frame to make a difference?
Yeah, look, we're going to be, the examples are really clear. We spend a lot of time, Erica and I, looking at other 5 million people countries on earth and saying, why are they getting better educational outcomes? And one of the things is if we can have a really defined, detailed curriculum by year, and then we can actually give a resource bank and digital tools that actually enable them to pull together lesson plans that are linked back very strongly to that curriculum. That just means that teachers aren't mucking around in the evenings and the weekends trying to put lesson plans together and dreaming up the content that they need to test or need to teach. And I saw it with my own wife, Amanda, who was a teacher. She spent endless evenings and weekends preparing the lesson plans when in fact actually having a central repository, as we see in many other countries, that a teacher can go to there as a starting point, get 70-80% of what they kind of want to do, add their localised content on top and their own perspective on top of it to tailor it to their kids. That's a great way for us to do it. So we've seen these tools exist in other countries. I think Finland is a great example where we can actually do that and actually give teachers, here's the curriculum and here's the lesson plan sort of starter that you need for 10 that actually can get you further down the road to not waste your time doing endless stuff that you don't need to be doing.
But are you going to, so New Zealand government sector has not had a great track record in creating software and resources in that way. Are you going to base it on something that exists or invent from
Yeah, we are. So we've seen good examples. If I take Finland as a great example, where software is really simple, it plugs straight into the curriculum, sucks that out. Teachers then get to assess whether that's a lesson plan that they want to start with, and it gets them 70%, 80% down the road, and then they do a bit of customisation on top to tailor it to their kids. So other countries do that job incredibly well. And again, we can talk about it as much as we have been in New Zealand, and it's lovely. We've got to stop the talk, we've got to start getting some action, and when we see proven success internationally, we should steal it with pride and nick it because we're interested in the outcomes. We're not interested in debating what system and how long we go on for all of that stuff. We can spend years doing that. We're past that point now. We have to get stuff done. So we know other countries can do it. We've seen models that we think are really appropriate and could be really exciting.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
We've got a teacher shortage in New Zealand. So what is your government going to do to start attracting these teachers to this country, especially when we have Canada giving great opportunities to migrants, and we've got a lot of damage to correct because of what's been going on in the past few years. I mean, we have got to third world status. So what's the solution?
We've got major challenges, as you've seen. Essentially the story of New Zealand has been a government that has spent a huge amount of money, constricted our immigration settings, and then the Reserve Bank printing a heap of cash. And essentially, the reason Erica is actually going to be our spokesperson for education, but is also our spokesperson for immigration, is twofold. Because one part is about how do we build up our workforce and talent from within the country, education, and the other part is how we actually attract great talent from around the world that wants to come to our country through immigration. And our answer has been really clear that actually our immigration settings have been way too restrictive. I can go to places like Ireland where there are teacher surpluses, and I've visited schools in Ireland to see what's going on there. They would be fantastic people to open up to come to New Zealand, but our offering is not competitive enough. And as Erica has been talking about over the last year, we have this green list. In order to get jobs on that green list, that's really difficult. And actually, we've seen it in other countries. You can be coming as a nurse, for example, to Australia. You don't even have to have a job, show up on day one, and there's a pathway to residency and there's support for your partner. Well, that's the competitive offering in a world of 8 billion people in 195 countries that we have to start to get competitive with our immigration settings. So, on the one hand, we're talking a lot about making sure we train and develop our teachers and they feel supported and they feel valued, and it's a great profession that they can do well in, and we want to encourage young people to go into it and feel that they're being supported. And on the other hand, you're right, we need to open up our immigration settings, and we're going to need immigration for New Zealand's future. When you look at our demographics and you look at where we are in 2040 and the number of people leaving the workforce versus the number of people coming in, immigration is going to be really important, and we want to compete for the best talent in the world. They don't just choose to come here because we think it's a great place. They choose and weigh up the opportunities of what does it look like in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and we've got to make that competitive. So it's both those pieces but coming together. Yes?
Are we paying teachers enough at the moment? I know that we're paying contractors enough because I was one, but do we give enough money to teachers to make it attractive for them to go into the teaching field?
Look, we're in the middle of a teacher negotiation, which, I don't want to get into the middle of because I don't have that information. I'm not party to that negotiation. All I'd say to you is we really want to make sure we value our teachers and they're paid incredibly fairly. And I think all parents in New Zealand want to see that resolved quickly and make sure that it's a fair deal for our teachers. What I just put out for you is, and I don't want to get too political on you, but I will. We've had a minister of education for 6 years called Chris Hipkins. And over that time, we have spent $5 billion more on education every year. And then in addition, we've hired 1,400 more public servants to work at the Ministry of Education. And yet we've got worse attendance and academic achievement records. And I want you to register that because that is quite profound. Coming from my background where you just, how can you not get the money from the centre where we're now building mega bureaucracies, and actually that's what this government believes in. They believe in centralisation and control, and actually we want to see that money come from the centre and get to the frontline services across our public services in general. And the way that we get that, I think, is something that we're very passionate about. We believe in getting the money out of centralisation and bureaucracies out to the front line. So we want to make sure it's a really valued profession. I've come from a background, my grandfather was a principal, my wife has been a teacher. I see how hard they work. I think parents up and down the country appreciate the work that's being done. We have to make sure that they get a message it's a valued profession. Yes, sir. Thanks, mate. Look, that hasn't been part of our conversation today. What we're really saying is we've got to focus on that first 8 years of primary and intermediate school, because we know, if we can get our kids coming out of early childhood education, regulating their emotions well, having good oral skills, they set up in primary school, and we have good teaching of the basics, a good assessment of how they're going against the curriculum, that's going to set them up well for school from there on through. But what I'd say to you is, it's a bit weird that, that actually 40% of our kids in NCA level 2 are actually, having literacy and numeracy challenges that are quite profound and serious.
That's part of the failure of the system.
Yeah. And so, we've got to start somewhere, and we've got to build from the base of a good primary and intermediate education so that we can then make sure the extension in secondary school, we get that right and move it on from there. It's not good enough 50% of the kids showing up at high school about to start off in NCA, actually not at curriculum. That's the first thing we can do to make that NCA system better. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I want to talk about something in a slightly different way. I want to talk about children being taught reading and writing on tablets, because having been a teacher, I don't think it's the best for young children, and I also see that there's a developing crescendo of technology, cell phones, television, and that the children in New Zealand and around the world are getting so, their brain is just utterly obsessed with a cell phone.
Yeah.
I think if we start with
I've got a few MPs that are like that too. Yeah. I said I've got a few members of parliament that are like that too, on their phones all the time, so yeah.
But I just think if we can in New Zealand just turn the children back into writing and reading, and not on a tablet, so their mind is not so, they become psychologically habitual. It's habitual to have themselves always looking at a screen. And I want to bring up this to everybody. Where I live, I'm in a neighbourhood where there are parents and children, little children, middle and young children. And this is what I see.
Yeah.
I see fathers and mothers walking along, and the mother is always doing this. As the children are walking along, she's holding the cell phone and she's looking at it, and she's not talking to the children. And I think we talk about the children not doing well at school. I think part of it is
Yeah, I think you got a point.
parents aren't talking to their children.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's the thing when Erica and I look at the evidence for, that first 1,000 days of success for kids when they come through, and how do we get them school ready for 5. One of the things is oral skills, and it's about the ability of parents to talk to their kids and engage with their kids. Yeah, look, I get it. I have seen some really good examples even this week, though, where I've seen young kids at 5 sitting down, actually not using the tablets and being taught the basics. And then at year 6, there's been a very good introduction of technology and computers and tablets at that point. So, but a fair point. Pretty tragic. I went out to dinner with my family a couple of months back, and I sat there and there was another family across the road, mum and dad and 2 kids, and all 4 of them were on their devices. And I thought, man, that's a shame. That's a real shame, mate. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, hi. Have you had a chance to look at the refreshed curriculum Te Mātai Aho? And if you have, what would you think about with all the work that's been done and the draft forms that are coming out?
Yeah, look, what I'd say is there's been fantastic feedback from teachers actually over the last, I guess it's almost a decade, isn't it, of sort of development of a curriculum refresh. Our key issues with it is that we want it to be really detailed and more defined by year, as we see overseas, rather than these 3-year bands, which I think gives teachers more clarity about what they're supposed to be doing in year, as we've talked about. The other piece is that we want to make sure that we build on what's there, but importantly, we need to make sure that that curriculum is, as I said, sort of grounded in those big rocks of those basics being done incredibly well. Erica, what else would we say about that? Because we have thought about that quite a bit. Sorry.
No, that's right. Oh, thank you. I want to say that, I talk to teachers up and down the country, and they've spent a lot of time
giving
on
feedback.
This, and we want to make sure that that counts for something. I don't think that what's been created is fair and representative of what the teachers wanted. And what we will do is go back and take that feedback and work on what's already been done to create something that, as Christopher Luxon has said, is more clearly defined year by year, so teachers have that guidance of how to move children through the curriculum so that they don't get left behind.
Yeah. Okay, can I just say, sorry, geography, sorry. You get the last question. It better be good, mate.
Second last question as president.
You get the last question as president. Fair enough.
Well, I guess a Pacific parent and a former teacher and now a proprietor of a school.
Yes.
What we do value is the we focus on content,
Yes.
core skills, and back to basics.
Yep.
And I think as a sort of parent, we've got a lot of other things we want to teach our kids, but actually we think the context of that should be parents' responsibilities in the local communities.
Yes.
And so we value the fact that we want the schools to concentrate on the core basics.
Yeah.
And we also like the idea of having choice. Where the area that I have a school in Porirua, half of the children go into other schools in the town. And people would argue, well, let's make the schools better. And yes, but that's been the plan for the last 20 years, and they still have the same failure rate. So why would a parent of any background, sort of Barbara River, go to those schools if they continually have those failure rates? So choice is a very big thing. So thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yep.
And Chris, the last question from me. You mentioned one of your 5 key pillars to lift incomes for all, and one of the ways to do that is to support business.
Yep.
So it'd be remiss of me to not ask you to outline how you think you're going to do that.
Yeah, look, I mean, just economically, our biggest challenge in New Zealand is that we've failed to drive to build a productivity's been our biggest challenge in New Zealand, I think, over the last 30 years. We're working incredibly hard as Kiwis. We work for an hour to earn what an Australian earns in 45 minutes. We work 9 weeks longer than the average Brit. I may not be saying much about the average Brit, but apologies for those that are in the room. But the upshot is that we have a productivity problem in New Zealand. And what we mean by that is an economic term, but essentially the value of goods and services that we're able to generate and produce divided by the people working on them, it's been really hard. And so our people end up working longer in order to get cash to deal with the costs that they've got at life. So that is the single biggest challenge that we have to grow our economy and to improve productivity in New Zealand. And we're going to do that through 5 things. One is you have to get this stuff on education sorted first and foremost. Because if we don't have a world-class education system and our kids aren't coming out the other end work ready and able to seize on higher value opportunities and to create higher wages and salaries for themselves, that doesn't move us forward. So education is number one, job number one. Number 2, we have to invest very strongly in infrastructure, and Chris Bishop's doing a great job pulling our thinking together around that because we need to be able to connect to the world and bring the world to us, but also to each other. And when I've sat down, a great example was I was in the Waikato recently, and a lovely young vet came up to me and she said, "Chris, do you know that Waikato Expressway has meant that I can do 2 more jobs a day? Because I can jump on and off that infrastructure and get more work done as a result. And I can also get home quicker to my kids." And I thought, yeah, that's what infrastructure does. It's got economic, social and environmental benefits. So education, world class, build out the infrastructure we need for our future. We have to invest a lot more in research and development in science and technology, and that's why we need to focus on these basics as well. We spend about a roughly average amount of money on research and development, but we are amongst the poorest in the world at actually converting that research and development to commercial enterprise. And so we've got to get that ecosystem right of how we do exactly that. Ireland is a good example of a country that's done that exceptionally well. The 4th thing we have to do is we have to free our business community up to embrace risk and to have some certainty because they're getting bogged down with costs and compliance. And we have turned New Zealand into a country of bureaucrats rather than a can-do country where you actually, if you want to start a business, you take a risk and you've got confidence and certainty about what the environment's going to look like going forward, and you want to go forward and make something happen for yourself, your family and your community. And I want young people feeling you can start a business in New Zealand and go anywhere in the world with it, but this is a place you want to do it, not go off to Australia and do it or go off to Michigan or the US or somewhere else. And the last thing that we have to do is we have to maintain international connections with the world, because we do not get rich selling stuff to each other and 5 million people on 2 islands in the South Pacific. We are in a world of 8 billion people, 195 countries, and we have to get out and about and hustle and sell great New Zealand products and services to the world. All of us in the room ultimately get rich by doing that. And sadly, we've been playing a very wet, very inward, very negative, very internal, insular game over the last 3 to 6 years. And we've got to stop that. Because actually, the Australians managed an early harvest free trade agreement with India during COVID. The Brits did something similar, and we've got to get out and hustle. So we know those 5 determinants of wealth are really education, infrastructure, certainly investing in research and development, freeing up our business sector, and making sure we have international connections. Cool. All right, can I just say in closing, I want you to know we have an awesome country. We have the best country on planet Earth. We have the most amazing, creative, determined, innovative people. There's nothing wrong with the New Zealand people. There's absolutely nothing wrong. We are world class. And I want New Zealand, and I believe New Zealand can do incredibly well into our future. Yet we've got some very big problems that we have to go face up to and sort out, where we have some massive opportunities to realise in this country too. We need to now get focused on getting things done and going forward with ambition and aspiration and positivity and confidence. And that's what we're going to do, hopefully, on October 14th. Thanks for your time.
Thanks again, Christopher, for coming out to the Hutt Valley, the best place in New Zealand to do business, to share your news with us. I say it all the time because it's true. And thanks again also to Gibson Sheet and Nicola for supporting today's event. As a chamber, we've got a full program of events ahead of us this year, so please stay abreast of what's going on and continue to attend. We've got a business draw that we're going to do very, very shortly. In fact, we're going to do it right now. Christopher, could you please draw a card out for us? It's a fantastic basket of locally made products from local businesses. Okay, the winner is Susie Hunt from Quinnovic. Woohoo. And I tell you, she only put one card in. She's very good. Her reward for asking questions.
Thank you.
Look, one final word from me. Thank you to all the chamber members in the room for what I'm sure is a very small group of you that are not yet financial members of the Chamber of Commerce. It starts at $25 a month. It's a tiny cost. Every little dollar helps us in a huge way to do things like this, to support you, to advocate for you, and to make sure that we are talking to those people that are making a difference and a future to our country. So if you're not a member, become one. Look, thanks again. We're going to have lunch outside in the foyer now. Thanks again, Christopher, for coming. Let's have an awesome day out there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Really? Oh,
A couple of brownies.
We're going to go to the pie shop. We're going to go to the pie shop on the way.
Literally just
let's get this out of the way.
from our office.
Really?
I'm very focused
Yeah.
on the important things.
Literally just got a message from Monica. Can you please get me a mince and cheese pie? I mean, those are brilliant basics.
We are going to go to we're going to let them know the range of the times that we pie shop when we get there.
Oh, yeah.
Because I couldn't remember the extent of different flavours.
Just don't steal your pie, yeah.
It's an
You know what
outstanding
happened
idea.
is the same thing as so when you put it in, you have to say yes for the amount, otherwise it'll tap you out, and I'm sure that's probably what. And in all the excitement, I had to do mine as well, again, because she's like, oh, it hasn't gone through, and I was like, so that's...
No. Cool. You're a lot slimmer than me.
Well, kia ora everyone. Everyone ready to go?
Hang on.
Hey, let's,
Sorry.
well, let's make sure.
Yeah.
We've got to make sure new sub's sorted.
Okay, we're good.
Okay, hey, listen, firstly, can I just say thank you so much for coming out today. As you can see, we're focused on making sure we teach the basics brilliantly. This is a part of our broader education policy, and if we can get it right and make sure our kids in primary and intermediate are really grounded well in maths, reading, and science and writing, that's going to be setting them up for great success. With that, happy to take any questions.
So you're
going
to be bringing
Is
back...
this just a reboot of national standards, widely seen as a failed strategy?
Absolutely not. What we're talking about here today is making sure that we can teach those basics really, really well, and that we're actually making sure that we are defining that curriculum well. We're making sure that teachers teach an hour of maths, reading and writing each and every day on average, and we're making sure we're supporting teachers to be able to do that incredibly well.
Bringing back
a-
a resource bank though, what support are you giving teachers in terms of mental health challenges, behavioural challenges in the classroom? Because they say that's what the problem is, that's what's stopping them from teaching.
Yeah, I acknowledge that, and there'll be more that we'll say about that in future conversations about education. But also what helps them a lot is making sure that there is good, regular, robust, standardised progression assessment to make sure that kids that often are not being identified early enough for their actual special learning needs. Erica and I were talking to a family recently, and they had a young child who has dyslexia, and they were told, oh look, it'll be right, he'll get up to speed eventually, and it actually wasn't the case. If we'd actually had a progression assessment, we could actually make that intervention much, much earlier. So what this is helping teachers is actually making sure we're really clear about the basics, the big rocks that we want to be communicated, the knowledge that we want to be disseminated and transferred to our kids.
You're bringing back a national standard of achievement. How is that not national standards?
Well, look, what we're doing here is we're making sure that we are focused on that each and every individualised child, we understand their progress against a really well-defined curriculum by each and every year group. That's what this is about. National standards was something quite different. And I'd just say to you, it was really designed, it had some good parts, making sure parents knew where things were at, but the feedback from teachers was it was a massive, burdensome overload of workload on them.
What of national standards that you won't bring forward, or what's the difference then? Lay out the difference between what was and what you're proposing.
One of the issues that we identified very early on by just talking to teachers around national standards was that it was overly burdensome because we were relying on their teacher judgment to assess where kids were at. What we want to be able to do is use a world-leading tool that adapts the questions during the test to children's abilities to find out where they're at. That teachers, by the way, already use for the most part in schools around New Zealand. It's easy to use. It also provides teachers with the knowledge of where to next for their learners, but also provides parents with the knowledge of where their kids are at in the curriculum.
They also did push back against standardised tests or having anything, and you alluded to some of the difficulties. Your policy does talk about nationally consistent standards and tests. So I suppose, how do you provide that flexibility that maybe wasn't there?
One of the things that we found really important was actually measuring progress, not a point-in-time test. One of the beauties of the test that we want to use, the assessment tool, which is world-leading in New Zealand, is the ability to set the level of test at where the child is at so that you can plan where they're at against the curriculum, rather than saying to them, here are a set of standards and guess what, you failed.
So how are you not going to be teaching to the test then, as opposed to just educating?
Sorry.
Yeah, look, one of the problems that we've got at the moment is a very, very loose curriculum that doesn't give any guidance to teachers as to what they should be teaching. It's basically finger in the wind, deciding what they teach next week or tomorrow, and that's wasting their time and also not valuing the fact that we have curriculum experts that are really clearly able to guide teachers through keeping kids on track. One of the things that we saw in national standards was that there was a tendency to teach to the test, but under the tool that we want to use, that won't be possible. But also, we are pretty confident that we want teachers to be teaching the basics every year in maths and literacy and science, and not leaving things to chance so that kids fall behind.
The government rolled out a maths and literacy.
The government rolled out a maths and literacy plan last year in March, very similar in a lot of themes to what you have. What are the differences between what they are proposing and are actively looking at now and your plan?
Well, the government have been talking about a literacy and numeracy common practice model for a while now. We've seen 3 documents that have basically said absolutely nothing, given us no guidance, taken no position. The final document is about to be released in September, incidentally, after the election. They've spent 6 long years while kids have come and gone from primary school, and guess what? Those kids are no better off than they were 6 years ago. And so actually the difference is we're setting out a very clear plan today. We will have a prescribed curriculum that sets out the core content knowledge that must be disseminated every single year, and we will make sure that kids are progressing through it. And that is very different than what Labor are saying.
If you're talking about time
I'm sorry, could you start again?
How quickly could that happen then under a national government if you're talking about urgent time?
Well, we want to be able to start the hour of maths, reading and writing in primary and intermediate schools from the beginning of the 2024 school year, and we think that we'll have the resource bank and the tool in place by the beginning of the 2025 school year.
And curriculum, all of those, when you're really those curriculum changes that are going to be key to your plan, when will they be in place in terms of those year 1 to 3 testing, all of that other stuff?
Look, what we want to do is build on a lot of the work that's already been done. And there are teachers around the country that have spent the best part of 5 years giving their feedback on how the curriculum should look. We want to take that and make it count. I've talked to curriculum experts around the country in different subject areas, and I said to them, do you need 6 months? Do you need a year? Do you know what? They said to me, Erica, you put the right people in the right room, we can have it done in 2 weeks. So actually, I'm not going to give them 2 weeks, of course, but here's the thing. When you get the right people in the room, you can create using the work that's already been done and the feedback from teachers that they've already given, you can create a curriculum, a really great curriculum in a very short period of time.
You're talking about restructuring the entire curriculum for primary school and intermediate. You're talking about creating a software with a resource bank for teachers. How much is this going to cost?
Well, what it's going to cost is an extra $10 million, and the reason for that is we're actually going to scrap the teacher registration fees. We think it's grossly unfair that our teachers, who are excellent in New Zealand, do a fantastic job by our kids, have to pay to teach and actually pay their registration fees. And the other piece of it, the actual redesign of the maths, the reading, the writing curriculum, making sure that we actually get the assessment tools in place. We can do that within the core budgets and the core work of the ministry. I want to be really clear with you. This is a government that has spent $5 billion more on education each and every year. It's hired 1,400 more public servants as a result. And so this is the core work of the ministry.
To those in the education sector.
Sorry, I'll go to Kushla.
Sorry, but for those in the education sector who every time there's a change of government, their entire work changes. It comes and it goes, and they have to get new curriculums and new ways of teaching. Every time there's a change, they're frustrated. What is your message?
Well, what we're saying is your feedback and your inputs into that curriculum development are not going to be lost. We're going to build on that. We want to take what's there, and we want to make sure it's much more definitive, and it's not broken into 2 to 3 year bands. It's broken into the 1 year band, and we're going to build on that work. And so I think we're very confident that we can actually. It's not about turning the whole thing upside down. It's making sure we build on what's there, and that we make crystal clear. And I make no apologies about it. I am brutally honest to say we are going to do maths, reading, writing and science and prioritise those things over everything else, because that's the foundation by which our kids will succeed with, and it hasn't been working.
The thing of the teacher registration fee, does that apply to all teachers, just primary teachers? Is it from early childhood upwards to
all teachers? I just don't think that teachers should be able to actually, have to pay for their registration every 3 years. I think it's inappropriate.
Standardisation of testing, would that apply to critical?
Standardisation of assessment, not testing, just so we're crystal clear. It's a progression assessment, yep.
Look, one of the things I looked at when we looked at kura kaupapa, there is a framework already in place that NZQA use, to assess mataranga Māori and how it's used across kura kaupapa. One of the tools that's already in that framework is the tool we're talking about. But one of the things that we've realised quite quickly is that it needs a lot of work and updating. So the ASTIL tool that we currently use needs a lot more content and te reo in it, and it needs to be much better aligned to the Māori curriculum. So there is a bit of work to be done. So it's not something that we can do straight away, but it is still a very good tool and is currently in what they already use in kura kaupapa.
Okay, and making kids learn the 3 hours an hour each a day and these testing end of year exams and stuff.
No, I want to be really clear with you. We're not talking about testing and standardised testing. What we're talking about is standardised progression assessment, and we're using an existing tool that's well used throughout many New Zealand schools already. And by having a really clear set of what the curriculum and knowledge transfer and the skills that we need our kids to be learning in any given year, and using that assessment tool, we're actually focused on individualised kids and their progression against that curriculum. We're not interested.
It's more intensive testing.
No, it's an intensive assessment, but we're using a tool that already teachers use up and down New Zealand and value, and we're making sure that it matches up against the curriculum really clearly.
What impact do you think this will have on attendance?
Well, I think if we can teach our kids the basics, they stay engaged in school. And we know that, and Erica and I, we've talked to a lot of principals about truancy and absenteeism and attendance at schools. One of the core reasons is if you arrive at year 9 for high school and you haven't got a mastery of the basics, you don't feel good about yourself and actually feel that great about school, and it's not surprising you don't want to attend school. So actually investing in the basics and making sure our kids are set up for success, when almost half or over half of them actually show up at high school on average, not at curriculum, that's got to really help our attendance.
Luke, so are you saying that essentially the assessment tool will be testing against knowledge rather than testing against other students, if you like?
Correct, that's exactly right. We're not that interested in pass or fail against a standardised test. What we're interested in is making sure that parents know, that teachers know, that individualised kids and their progress against the curriculum and the knowledge that we're imparting to them each and every year is really clear. And if they need some catch-up, we can get the support and the resources to them quickly. If they need some extension, we can also do that as well. So I need, that's why I say it's a robust, standardised progression assessment tool that we really want to make sure that our kids, we can't let them go for 3 years, or actually worst case show up at NCA, and that's the first evidence that we've got that they actually haven't got a mastery of numeracy and literacy.
It looked like from your speech today that obviously you want to spend an hour a day on average on the 3 big things, but then within that you're essentially comfortable or quite happy for teachers to then work out how they're going to do themselves at the classroom. I mean, is that sort of it? You're trying to get the mix. Yeah, I think the mix between.
Yeah, I think the thing is, I have to say, there are amazing teachers, and even just this week I've been in 2 schools and just seen incredible teachers who've brought to life maths, reading and writing in really highly engaged ways that have really engaged their kids. So I want to be really clear. We're not sitting at a desk doing endless spelling tests, as I said, repetitive maths exercises. There's lots of ways in which teachers are bringing that to life. I've watched teachers go out and do experiments in nature with a view of actually how that drives numeracy and maths. And so there's a whole bunch of things our teachers, let's let them be creative about how they deliver that. But what we want to be clear about is these are the basic concepts and knowledge that we need you to impart in this given year. It can't be over a 2 to 3 year loose band. It can't be just loosely competencies. It has to be really rooted in knowledge and core knowledge that we need to teach our kids, and then they'll bring it to life in really engaging ways.
So are you confident that assessments for, say, a 7-year-old twice a year will actually work?
Well, it's an assessment against the curriculum. It's not a standardised test, right? We're actually assessing each and individual child against their knowledge and how they are learning that knowledge against that assessment. And I think that's really important. Parents want to know where their kids are. Teachers want to know who needs more support, who needs more extension. We owe that to our kids.
Where does the Māori education sector sit under your plans, like whare kura kaupapa, kohanga reo.
Yeah.
Sure. Look, there is a review underway, of course, of the Māori, Te Mataranga o Aotearoa at the moment as well, and we would expect that the same principles we're talking about today apply in that curriculum as well, which is a clear framework that tells teachers exactly how to progress kids so that they're at curriculum by the end of year 8. All parents around New Zealand want to know that their children are progressing. They want to know that they're not falling behind. They want to know that they're accelerating, and that's no different for the parents of children in Kura Kaupapa.
We've seen a lot of we've seen them achieving a lot higher in Māori education.
It's been great, very supportive.
In comparison to in auraki sort of education.
Yeah.
So can we take some of that stuff and...
Well, one of the things that I really want to do with the assessment, because at the moment you understand we're flying completely blind. There's no way of measuring progression, and at the centre we've got no data to know who's doing well and who's doing poorly. But with this kind of information, we can go away and go, hey, here's a kura kaupapa who are doing outstandingly well. How do we learn from them and replicate that across the system? Data allows you to do that, but at the moment we have nothing, and that's the problem.
Can you outline what a school day looks like under a national government when you've got 3 hours on average with reading, writing and maths? How are you going to make time for PE, food tech, woodworking, whatever it might be? How are you actually going to fit that in?
Well, look, many schools across New Zealand are already doing it, but there are other schools that aren't. And what we're saying is we're going to leave that to schools to work out how they manage their timetable. But all we're asking for is we're going to say, on average, we're expecting an hour of maths, an hour of reading, and an hour of writing.
So how are you going to keep track of that? How are you going to monitor it?
Well, we have our aero processes that will be the primary reason to make sure that we're monitoring the delivery of an hour of each of those subjects each day. On average.
It seems like you're leaving. I mean, how the teachers teach, and also this, this approach here. A lot of it is just being left to the teachers to decide. Are you confident that we're not going to see different approaches that perhaps don't fit with
what's different is we are starting with real clarity and real definition about what we expect to teach in maths, reading and writing in each of the years up until year 8 in primary and intermediate schools. That's a really good starting point because we need to know the knowledge that needs to be transmitted by year, not in loose 2 to 3 year bands as we currently see. And we see that in other parts of the world, an annual focus on what knowledge needs to be disseminated and trained.
That literacy and numeracy or achievement has declined over successive governments, but I suppose what responsibility or acknowledgement, even according to your own data, from national and then this Labour government, it's gone down. So how can people trust you when National has been part of the problem in the past?
Well, look, all I'd say is it's been over successive governments. I'm new, I'm focused on the future, I'm here to solve problems. This is one of the big problems that we've got. We've got to get a solution to that problem. We can keep talking about why our kids aren't delivering maths, reading and writing and why we're slipping, or we can do something about it. And we know from the evidence what works. We think, having defined curriculums, having, an hour each on each of those key subjects, making sure we do, progression assessments so that parents and teachers know where they are, and making sure we back up our teachers with the right training and support. That's the way we've got to move it forward.
There have been failures from the Labour government, but
Jane, last question.
Failures from the Labour government, obviously, but do you then accept too that national standards were part of the problem?
I accept that actually over successive governments we haven't delivered over the last 30 years the outcomes that we need.
They were part of the problem because if you look at the decline over that timetable, and I'm talking about Labour as well, but do you accept that it's part of the problem?
I've been looking at how we were doing it in the year 2000 and why is it that 15-year-olds in New Zealand did so much better than 15-year-olds today 23 years later. So I'm less hung up on, actually, all I'll say to you is successive governments haven't nailed it and haven't sorted it out, but we are determined, and I make no apologies for it. We are not going to be in a place going forward in New Zealand where our kids do not have a good mastery and a good understanding of the basics. We owe it to them, their future depends on it, and the country depends on it. So that's where we're going to start. All right, guys, I've got to go to the school. Sorry, I've got to go to the
just on child poverty rate.
Sorry. Listen, firstly, can I just say thank you so much for everyone ready to go?
Hang on.
Hey, listen.
Sorry.
Well, just make sure. We've got to make sure New Sub's sorted.
Okay, we're good.
Okay, hey, listen, firstly, can I just say thank you so much for coming out today. As you can see, we're focused on making sure we teach the basics brilliantly. This is a part of our broader education policy, and if we can get it right and make sure our kids in primary and intermediate are really grounded well in maths, reading and science and writing,